Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Marasco. I'm a PhD student in the Schulich School of Engineering, and I'm honored to be your host for today's ceremony. Before we get started, we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. We would also like to note that the University of Calgary is situated on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We are here today to honor the lives of the 14 women killed on December 6, 1989 at L'École Polytechnique in Montreal. 12 were engineering students, 1 a nursing student, and 1 a university staff member. But all were vibrant women killed by a man claiming that he was fighting feminism. Many others were injured, and an additional list was found naming 19 other feminist women as targets. In his suicide note, the killer referred to feminism as a justification for a literal act of war, a war against women. The massacre remains the worst school shooting in Canadian history, and the anniversary is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. The Minister of Service Alberta and the Status of Women, Honourable Stephanie McLean, was unable to join us today, but she has provided the following statement to recognize this tragedy and address her commitment in moving forward. Hello, everyone. Thank you for making time to be at the University of Calgary today. I would have loved to be there with you in person. Know that I stand here with you today and every day to stop violence against women and girls. As you are gathered in Calgary, I am with allies in Edmonton to reflect on the loss of 14 women whose lives were cut far too short quickly by a man who could not accept their brilliance, hard work, and their rightful place at L'École Polytechnique. Thankfully, there are organizations like the Women's Resource Centre to support today's generation of university students in Calgary and the staff and faculty who support them. You have made a safe space for women on campus, and you do so in a way that encourages women to boost each other and build community. You are also starting the public conversations we all need to have about what we accept as normal male behavior, about accepting ourselves and our identities, and empowering women's leadership. My ministry, Status of Women, joins you in that effort. We know the facts. We know violence is rooted in power structures that threaten women's safety and stop us from enjoying equal opportunities in Alberta. But we can fix that. Alberta has an exceptional community of people who are serving women and advocating for their needs. Our government stands with you. We are working hard to break down the barriers that keep women from exercising choice in their lives. Every day, Status of Women is working cross-ministry with community organizations to end violence against women and girls. There's so much work to do to make sure we never see a day again like we saw in 1989, or any other day a woman is killed simply because she is a woman. Days free of gender-based violence happen far too rarely in Alberta. It is an ongoing travesty. But there's a light. Those of you who are here today to show your support for women and organizations like the University of Calgary's Women's Resource Centre that serve women, cast light on the hidden behavior that keeps the gender wage gap high, threats hurled at outspoken women online, and the possibility of violence strong. Today we remember the women who have lost their lives to gender-based violence. Their memories are alive to encourage us in our fight to end violence against women and girls and to ensure for all women not just equal rights under the law, but equal opportunities. Thank you. I was born in 1989, 10 months before the massacre. The first time I understood the full horror of the event was when I learned about it in Girl Guides as part of a badge about women and history. 27 years later, I am fortunate that I have been able to pursue an engineering education without fear, thanks to the brave work of many women and men who jumped into action after the violent events at L'École Polytechnique. One of those pioneering women was Claudette McKay-Lassonde, who at the time was the president of the Professional Engineers of Ontario. She gathered together other concerned female engineers to found and establish the Canadian Engineering Memorial Foundation, which continues to support women in engineering in memory of the students who were killed. I am honored to be here today as the Foundation's 2016 Claudette McKay-Lassonde Award recipient. Each year, the enormity of this anniversary does not escape me as a female engineering student. Bias and violence against women are very real issues, and despite the progress that has been made, there is still work to be done. This is a national day not just for remembrance, but also for action. This year, we ask you to reflect on our theme, I'll Stand Up, and what that phrase means to you and to those in your life. What does it mean to stand up against violence? What does it mean to stand up for women? The current media and political climate surrounding women's issues is troubling. Young girls and boys have even watched adults debate over the impact of negative and derogatory words against women. Many celebrities and media icons distance themselves from feminism, a suddenly dirty word that provokes controversy and anger. Violence against women is not isolated to large-scale massacres. It includes a young girl afraid to go to school because the bullies pull her hijab and push her into the gravel. It includes the teenager who wakes up after an assault she can't remember because of a drink she thought was friendly. It includes the professional who loses her job after refusing her boss's advances. And it includes the mother of 3 who endures the bruises because she faces homelessness otherwise. Today, consider standing up for the first step for another year of change to right the wrongs that happen every day. It is becoming increasingly important that we work together as a supportive community to implement progress. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to the women we remember here today. Please turn your attention now as a campus security officer lights the December 6th memorial candle, and we will observe a minute of silence. Thank you. Please turn your attention to Walter MacDonald White Bear as he plays a musical interlude. Thank you, Walter. Today we are joined by Dr. Elizabeth Cannon. Dr. Cannon is not only alumna of our institution, but a renowned engineer, an academic, and the University of Calgary's first female president. She has always been a personal role model of mine as a strong female engineering leader. She is an incredible example of the potential held by young women in post-secondary institutions, much like the 14 women whom we are remembering today. Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Cannon.
Thank you very much, Emily. I had the pleasure of meeting Emily when she was an undergraduate student, so I'm so delighted and proud to see Emily doing her PhD and being recognized through the Claudette Michaela Sond Award from the Canadian Engineer Memorial Foundation. I know Claudette would be very proud to see your accomplishments, Emily. Thank you so much. Thank you to the December 6th planning group. I know you've done a lot of hard work to ensure that we continue at the University of Calgary to recognize this very important day. I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, whom we'll hear from, Jeremy Loveday, a Victoria City Councillor and performance poet, who will be talking about his work in developing healthy masculinity and how to engage men in the prevention of gender violence. Of course, Walter MacDonald White Bear, a cultural support worker here in our community, and I think a wonderful addition to this program in terms of his musical talent. And I'd also like to welcome and thank all of our faculty, our staff, our students, many of our leaders and our senior leadership team who are here today, because this is truly about the community coming together. December 6, 1989, I was a student studying engineering here at the University of Calgary. I was pursuing my PhD. I was a young mother of a daughter, thinking that the world was open to me and to my daughter, and there were no barriers per se in what we could think of for our future in whatever profession we chose. Well, despite that thought, of course, on this day in 1989, that all changed. It was a day of horrific tragedy for our country, for the profession of engineering, and I think particularly for women here, not only studying engineering, but across our country and beyond. But as Emily noted, that day, as tragic as it was, and here we are, celebrating still and recognizing those who lost their lives and what it means for trying to create a community that is health, safe, and resilient for all, a lot of good has happened. Certainly in my life and my community, I think it invigorated the engineering profession to say this cannot happen again. We must be able to encourage, support, and ensure that young men and women who desire to study this great profession have the opportunity and encouragement to do so. And this encouraged me personally as somebody who had support in my family and through my academic studies to give back, and inspired me to become a chair for women in science and engineering, which I did for 5 years from 1997 to 2002. But I was also inspired as a mother, and increasingly as an academic leader, and now as president of the university, to ensure that we create an environment here on our campus that provides the culture, the supports, and certainly the resiliency that we need to be successful. And I want to thank many in this room and beyond for all of the hard work that you have done. I believe that we are a role model campus of what could and should be done to create the environment that we all aspire to. I want to particularly note the Committee for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment and Sexual Violence, the work that they've done, the recommendations that they have put forward, which is now leading to the development of a new sexual violence policy that will be working its way through governance through the new year. This was one of the very important recommendations that they put forward. We see the creation of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Protected Disclosure. Again, a very important symbol on our campus and beyond to ensure that we have the resources, support, and safe space for individuals to discuss protected disclosure matters such as sexual harassment or discrimination. The work of our Women's Resource Center, of which we are very, very proud, the Consent Awareness and Sexual Education Club, CASE, for their groundbreaking work with Ask First, creating a culture of consent, a project that is so important to ensure that students are empowered and better understand what consent truly means. We've also seen the launch of programs such as Calgary Strong, again, which is about building resiliency in our community. It is about programs such as our Bystander Intervention Program, which has trained thousands of students, faculty, and staff on how to be proactive and to intervene in situations involving violence, bullying, or signs of emotional distress. And this year's I Believe You campaign to raise public awareness and to send a positive message of support to survivors of sexual assault. I could talk about more. There are so many leaders, including our own campus security, our first responders, the training that they do, the message that is sent, and the culture we're trying to create. This is a commitment of the University of Calgary. It's certainly a commitment that I make and I know is shared by my colleagues. So I want to thank everyone for being here today on this very important day. We will not forget, we will do better, and we will ensure that the University of Calgary is truly a role model and a place where all of our students, all of our community members feel safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Dr. Cannon, and for illuminating the ongoing commitment of the university in addressing gender-based violence and supporting the members of our campus community. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our keynote speaker, Jeremy Loveday, a Canadian performance poet and Victoria City Councillor. Jeremy's poetry has sparked international debate and earned him a global following. He speaks his truth powerfully on topics such as gender violence, social and environmental justice, love, manhood, and leadership, as he believes vulnerability is a sign of strength and that together we can make this world a better place. I would now like to invite Jeremy Loveday to the podium.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here today. It really is my honor to be a part of this very important event and this very important day. I'd like to thank the Women's Centre, the University of Calgary, and everyone who worked hard to make this event happen, and for all of you for doing amazing work every day to make sure that this campus and this community is safe and inclusive for everybody. I also want to start by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and that the city of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and the role of colonialism in causing a disproportionate level of violence to Indigenous people, particularly women and girls. We're here to honor the lives that have been lost to gender-based violence on December 6th, and also those who have survived it. Perhaps one of the greatest ways we can honor these lives is by taking action. And that's why I think today it's so apt that the theme is I'll Stand Up. And while we say the names, and we have the names of those who were so callously murdered just for being women on December 6th, if we were to say the names of all of the women in the last 5 years who have been sexually assaulted, it would take 32 days. That's just in Canada alone. And last week, this is part of the 16 days of action. And at the beginning of that 16 days, I was in Victoria, and I was at a vigil to mark the day which is Unite to End Violence Against Women at the BC Legislature. It was organized by a group of women activists called the Grandmothers Advocacy Network. And the majority of attendees had white hair and lines on their faces that showed the full lives they'd lived. And it struck me that these women should be in the victory lap of their life. They should be enjoying themselves and relaxing. Instead, they have dedicated themselves to making sure that future generations of women don't have to face sexism and violence in the way that they have for their whole lives. And with this call to unity, I looked around at the vigil, and there was only 4 men out of the whole audience. And I think this starts to paint the picture of how this is really a cultural struggle, and how it's our job, each and every one of us, to stand up, to denormalize and disrupt this culture of violence and this culture of rape everywhere it exists. And perhaps when we get to the place where 50% of people at that vigil, or even 50% of the people at events like this are men, that starts to be a signifier that there is a shift happening. I came to this place of doing this work publicly just by writing one poem. And it's called Masks Off, and it's a challenge to men to look at the way that our words and our actions perpetuate a culture of violence, normalize it. So even if we as men are not the ones who are perpetrators individually, how our actions are still allowing that violence to occur, how our silence is allowing that violence to occur. And I'm going to do that poem now. So it's called Masks Off. It's all too familiar. Fault lines written by tongues bitten by silence. Thoughts formed when we weren't searching for violence in our questions, our suggestions. It's all too familiar. What was she wearing? Was she walking alone? She shouldn't have drank so much. She should have been more careful. It was her fault. Like gender violence isn't a man's issue. Like men can't help themselves. Like the responsibility for one's own actions doesn't fall on one's own shoulders. Like men don't have a responsibility for how other men act. And I remember as a young teen learning the facts. 1 in 3. 1 in 3. It made me sick. How could men like me do this? They couldn't, I thought. They couldn't. They must be monsters. They must be monsters. Monsters in the masks of men. Monsters in the masks of men. Rearrange their faces until I no longer see myself in them. Monsters. And I remember going to a party in East Vancouver, seeing a patch on my friend's jacket that said, "Stop rape." The message so clear, so inarguably simple, but yet it left a bad taste, because it jarred me from my place of comfort, because it reminded me the reality we all face, and that initial reaction, my initial reaction, allowed for silence and therefore perpetuated violence, and it's a clear case of the culture of rape. And I remember in the hockey dressing room, cheering along as my teammates proclaimed that in victory we had raped the other team. Or in the lunchroom, my boss made a sexist joke and I said nothing. Or this morning when I pulled on an article of clothing and referred to it as a wife beater. This language and culture of violence touches us all. But if we just dismiss perpetrators as monsters, it allows us not to analyze our own actions. Men, take your masks off. Men, take responsibility. Men, open your mouths wider, show more than your teeth. There is a softness in your throat waiting to be freed. Men, we are responsible for the vast majority of violence. It's an epidemic and it doesn't have to be this way. Men, if you could make the world safer for the women you love, for all people, children, women, and men, wouldn't you? You can. We need you to be brave, to speak up, and to be more than a bystander. Men, take your masks off. Let's look each other in the eyes. Men, let's talk. So, thanks. And before going further, I want to acknowledge that all the work I do on this topic, all the words I say have been said by women for generations, often in the face of much harsher consequences and with much less acclaim than men who do the same work. And I see myself in this role because after putting out that poem, it went viral online, and I received messages from all around the world from survivors and also men who said, I want to have these discussions, how do we get this going? And men who are doing this work, and also death threats from men who felt that somehow me asking other men and myself to look at our own actions and see how we're complicit in perpetuating this violence, somehow that's threatening to their manhood and their masculinity. And what I saw was that there's such a leadership gap from men on this issue that someone who just wrote one poem is all of a sudden being looked at and asked to be an expert on the issue. And I'm not an expert, but what I saw is that there was space there, and I feel that I needed to step into it. And that space for me involves microphones, and it involves relationships, and it involves my community. And that's transformed me to a place where I feel that until there's 50% of men at these events, I will keep doing this. And I also think that part of that is once you start talking about it publicly, you become more accountable in your own life. And it leads you to look at your own relationships and your own actions and have to live up to your own words. And so it's renewed a focus and a commitment in my personal life, which has been a real growth for me as well. In that poem, I talk about cheering along as my teammates proclaimed that in victory we had raped the other team. And I remember when I was younger, I remember saying things like that. And then I remember hearing it and thinking it wasn't cool, but not saying anything. And now getting to a place finally where I'll call it out and say, hey, that's not cool, that's not funny. But we've heard the phrase locker room talk in the media a lot lately. And when the President-elect Trump bragged about sexual assault, he normalized it by saying boys will be boys. He downplayed it. He said it's just locker room talk. And I heard a lot of things in the locker room, nothing as bad as what he was saying, but things that approached it. And so maybe he's right. Maybe that is how men talk in all male spaces. And I think we need to disrupt that, and part of that work is by bringing these discussions into primarily male spaces, because this isn't how men have to be. And we need to step up. We need to recognize that we are responsible for that vast majority of violence, and we need to change that. At the vigil that I mentioned earlier, I had a number of grandmothers come up to me and say, well, you're such a good man for being here. And to me, there's nothing special about men doing this work. This should be the bare minimum requirement of anyone who wants to be a leader in our society. You know, our Prime Minister, in juxtaposition to the President-elect, he gets heralded for being a feminist and for speaking with respect about women. And to me, it's just such a bare minimum that this shouldn't be celebrated. It should be required. We expect our leaders to be role models. And I think in some ways, we need to all see ourselves as role models. How many of you in your life have had a small moment, some micro-interaction that at the time it doesn't seem important, but then years down the road, you're still thinking about it? I see a lot of people nodding. And I know that I have lots of those. It's even harder to tell when those moments are happening when you're creating that moment for someone else. It's almost impossible. And at every minute, there are people who are looking to you, taking cues from you, seeing what of their actions are okay or not okay, what of their inactions are okay or not okay. We are all role models, whether we choose to be or not. So the question isn't whether or not we want to lead in that way, it's whether it's how we want to lead in that way. And so I have a list of 4 suggestions for men, and I'll finish with that and a poem. The first is, as men, I think the most important thing we can do is listen. And that's listen to survivors. It's listen to the experiences of women and trans people who face violence, face men's violence. And it's listening to when you're called out for how your words and your actions are affecting other people. And it's also realizing the ways that we as men take up space. Like, who here's been to a dinner party where the only people talking at the table are men? And that erases stories. I think the second thing is The hardest work that we can do is in our personal lives. There's this age-old cultural myth that stoicism equals strength for men. And I think one thing we need to do to undo that is start to see vulnerability as a sign of strength. And so that means building a community of accountability where we can do this work together, where we can show our progress, take responsibility for the mistakes we make. There is a culture of violence that's taught to us from the time we are born. And so it's a messy process to detangle that and to unlearn it. And so I think showing that work, admitting your mistakes, allows other people to come along that journey with you and be in that journey together. Third, it was great to hear the president mention the bystander intervention happening here. I think that's a key thing, is being more than a bystander. Silence perpetuates silence, and that silence perpetuates violence. And so being more than a bystander, taking those workshops, I think that's key. There's a researcher, Alan Berkowitz, and his research shows that 80% of college-age men are uncomfortable when they see a woman being belittled or mistreated. So that's 80% of men at college age who would speak up, except for the silence is normalized. And so once one person speaks up, that creates space for other people to speak up. And that's how you start breaking down that silence and creating a norm where people are now calling that out and being more than a bystander and not allowing it to continue. Lastly, I think we need to build a culture of consent. And currently we live in a culture of rape. And part of that means that we need to end the shame that is so associated with sex. And so who here's had a conversation where they felt embarrassed talking about sex? Everybody, at some point in time. And I think to do that, and this is some amazing work by Farah Khan out of Ontario. I'd suggest you check her out if you haven't. She talks about shifting from sex as a commodity to sex as collaboration, and no longer seeing it as a scarcity. And I think that goes a long way to building that culture of consent. And I think that culture of consent goes way past sex. It's in our everyday interactions. It's breaking down the entitlement that people feel to each other's lives and each other's bodies. So I've been practicing this and trying to unlearn this through everyday interactions, just by, before I give someone a hug, asking them. And I've been practicing with my niece and nephew, actually, who are 6. And I used to just pick them up and throw them in the air, and they would love it. But, they'd giggle and scream. But wanting to now, I always ask them, can I pick you up? And wait for them to say yes before I do it. And this it allows me to practice and allows them to know that their boundaries are important from a young age. And so that's just one thing that I've been doing in my own life to try to do this unlearning. So I'm going to do a poem and just leave you with that. So this is a poem that sort of touches on the last, all those 4 things, and it's about street harassment, it's about consent, and it's about being more than a bystander. This was any day, in any parking lot, anywhere. And he was an average-looking guy, not much to note. Some might even say that at first glance he looked kind. But his eyes, as she approached, began to pry from chest to toe to chest with a hungry entitlement that slipped slyly into a smile as he coughed a, "Hey, beautiful," at his target as she walked past hurriedly with a head-down silence that looked well practiced. He then turned to me, motioned for my approval, as if there was some sort of brotherhood in this predation, some sort of kinship in the making of this unsafety. I shook my head at him in disgust, and he was disappointed with my disdain. But maybe I should have said more. Instead, I continued to watch, and the next person to pass him was an older man with a small black dog, leashed and happy. The parking lot man brightened instantly and said, "Can I pet your dog?" He waited for a yes, held out a hand for a first sniff before petting the dog's ears gently, and I asked, was it the dog's teeth that taught him the language of consent? Was it the dog's relationship to a man that made him show respect? It's not a compliment to make other people unsafe, and this Entitlement by men to women's bodies is commonplace, but at least we now know it's possible to teach consent, as the parking lot man has learned first to ask first before petting dogs. And I've replayed this little scene over and over again in my mind as if it were a movie and wondered, how could I play it out differently? Take 2. Man is standing in parking lot. Woman walks by man. They may or may not say hello to each other. Older man with black dog walks to the parking lot. Parking lot man asks to pet the dog. Man says yes. Both parking lot man and dog are happy with the petting. I consider whether or not I should get a dog. So one last thought is just another way that we can support the amazing frontline workers who are doing. And I think there's information at the table. I don't know exactly all the stuff that goes on in Calgary, on the university, and in the community as a whole, but there's a panel at 2 o'clock which you can learn more about what's going on here, and I've heard amazing things. It sounds like there's a lot of people doing really, really important work, and it really is my honor to be here and to get to speak with you all and learn from you all in the panel as well. So thank you all for having me. It's my honor.
Thank you, Jeremy, for providing us with your perspective of what standing up means and sharing your talents with us. I would like to thank all the partners who support this event every year, the December 6th event planning team members, campus security, Women's Resource Center volunteers, and all of you who have attended today. Today's event is part of a larger campaign to end violence against women. The Women's Resource Center has chosen to adopt the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Violence campaign from November 25th until December 10th, an international campaign to highlight the complex issues of violence against women and what individuals can do to prevent them. The campaign has been commemorated by individuals and groups around the world who use a human rights framework to call for the elimination of all forms of violence against women by raising awareness and providing a forum for dialogue. If you'd like to find out more about this campaign, please visit the Women's Resource Center website, which is ucalgary.ca/women. And please pick up a traditional memorial candle on your way out, which were handmade by Women's Resource Center volunteers and campus community. All proceeds go towards the Women's Resource Center's vital services. And thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Though the obstacles we face may not be comfortable or easy, they are worth challenging. Every time you stand up against fear, hatred, and violence, you are standing up for women everywhere. The messages and actions that we choose every day will be heard and felt by those who are younger, looking for role models as they navigate their own struggles. Thank you for being part of our message today. Finally, I would like to thank Walter MacDonald White Bear for all of the music, and he has been a long-standing participant in this event for many years, and he is going to play us out. Thank you.